The sanctity of a sanctuary is one of the oldest concepts in human civilization. For centuries, houses of worship have served as refuges, places where the external noise of political strife and societal conflict is meant to yield to silence, prayer, and community. However, in modern America, the boundaries that once protected these sacred spaces are eroding. We are witnessing a shift in the tactics of political agitation, moving from the public square directly into the private pews of religious institutions. This week, a significant development occurred that signals a potential turning point in how the federal government addresses this erosion. The United States Department of Justice has launched a formal civil rights investigation following an incident in Minnesota where agitators allegedly stormed a church during a service. This is not merely a local news story about a disruption. It is a matter of federal law, constitutional interpretation, and the delicate balance between the right to protest and the right to worship freely. According to reporting from Fox News, the DOJ is probing whether these actions violated federal statutes designed to protect religious liberty. The implications of this investigation extend far beyond the borders of Minnesota. It touches upon the enforcement of the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act, or the FACE Act, and raises critical questions about the consistency of federal law enforcement. Today, we will conduct a deep dive analysis into this event. We will dismantle the legal frameworks involved, examine the history of the FACE Act, and project the potential security and political scenarios that could arise from this DOJ intervention. We must ask ourselves a difficult question. If the federal government steps in now, does it signal a new era of protection for religious institutions, or is it a reactive measure to a rapidly escalating climate of domestic hostility? To fully grasp the magnitude of this investigation, we must first establish the historical and legal landscape. The United States Constitution enshrines the free exercise of religion in the First Amendment. However, the physical protection of that right has evolved over decades. For much of American history, the protection of church services was a matter of state and local law, typically covered under disturbing the peace or trespassing statutes. The paradigm shifted significantly in 1994 with the passage of the FACE Act. While this legislation is most frequently associated with the protection of reproductive health clinics, the statute contains a critical, often overlooked provision. It explicitly prohibits the intentional obstruction of any person lawfully exercising or seeking to exercise the First Amendment right of religious freedom at a place of religious worship. It also prohibits the intentional damage or destruction of the property of a place of religious worship. The enactment of this law created a federal jurisdiction over what was previously a local police matter. It allows the Department of Justice to step in when local statutes are insufficient or when the nature of the offense strikes at the core of civil rights. In the case of the Minnesota incident, the allegation is that agitators did not merely protest outside on the sidewalk, a constitutionally protected activity, but physically breached the interior of the church, creating a chaotic environment that prevented the congregation from continuing their service. Understanding the distinction between protest and obstruction is vital here. In a democratic society, the public square is open for debate. However, the interior of a private religious institution during a service is not a public square. The legal theory underpinning the FACE Act is that when physical presence is used to intimidate, block, or halt the exercise of a right, it ceases to be speech and becomes conduct. This distinction is the battlefield upon which the current investigation will be fought. We must also look at the cultural context. Over the past decade, we have seen an intensification of tactic by various activist groups. The strategy of direct action has moved from lobbying lawmakers to confronting individuals in their private lives, at restaurants, and now in their places of worship. This reflects a breakdown in the unspoken social contracts that previously kept political battles outside the sanctuary doors. The Minnesota incident is a manifestation of this broader trend, where no space is considered neutral. Let us now move into a specialized analysis of the DOJ's involvement. The decision by the Civil Rights Division to launch an investigation is a calculated move. Federal resources are finite. Therefore, the selection of this case suggests that the Justice Department views this specific incident as meeting a high threshold of severity. From a legal perspective, investigators will be looking for specific elements to prove a violation of the FACE Act. First, they must prove intent. They must demonstrate that the agitators went to the church with the specific purpose of disrupting the service or intimidating the congregants. Second, they must prove that force, the threat of force, or physical obstruction was utilized. Shouting slogans might be disruptive, but blocking aisles, storming the altar, or physically clashing with ushers crosses the threshold into federal territory. We must also analyze the political dimension of this enforcement. There has been significant criticism in recent years regarding the perceived selective application of the FACE Act. Critics have argued that the DOJ has aggressively utilized the act against pro-life demonstrators outside clinics while being less proactive regarding attacks on churches or crisis pregnancy centers. By launching this investigation in Minnesota, the DOJ may be attempting to demonstrate impartiality and a commitment to enforcing the religious worship prong of the statute just as vigorously as the clinic access prong. Furthermore, we must consider the intelligence and security aspect. When a group coordinates to enter a private facility and disrupt operations, it involves planning, communication, and command structures. This moves the incident from a spontaneous outburst to an organized operation. Federal investigators will likely be examining digital communications to determine if this was a coordinated effort by a specific organization to target religious institutions systematically. If evidence suggests a pattern of targeting, this investigation could expand significantly, potentially implicating leadership structures of the agitator groups involved. The economic and psychological impact on the church itself cannot be understated. Security costs for religious institutions have skyrocketed in recent years. When a church is stormed, it forces the administration to implement physical security measures, cameras, guards, controlled access points that fundamentally alter the welcoming nature of a house of worship. This imposes a security tax on the exercise of religion, draining resources that would otherwise go to charitable works. Now, let us evaluate the potential impacts and future scenarios resulting from this investigation. The outcome of this probe will set a powerful precedent for how federal law interacts with protest movements. In the first scenario, we see a robust prosecution. If the DOJ brings charges and secures convictions under the FACE Act, it sends a clear deterrent message. It signals to activist groups across the political spectrum that while speech is protected, the physical disruption of worship services carries severe federal consequences, including significant fines and prison time. This could lead to a de-escalation of tactics, forcing groups to keep their demonstrations on the sidewalk and out of the sanctuary. In the second scenario, the investigation concludes without charges, or charges are dismissed. This would likely be interpreted as a green light for similar tactics. If the federal government determines that storming a church does not meet the statutory definition of obstruction or intimidation, we can expect to see a proliferation of these incidents. Activist groups will view the sanctuary as a viable, low-risk theater for political theater. This would inevitably force churches to rely on private security solutions, potentially leading to physical altercations between private security and agitators, escalating the risk of injury. We must also consider the geopolitical and societal impact. A nation where religious services require federal protection or armed guards is a nation under severe internal stress. It signals a fragmentation of the social fabric. For international observers, this is another data point indicating the volatility of the American domestic landscape. It suggests that the internal mechanisms for conflict resolution are failing, leading to direct confrontation in spaces previously considered inviolable. Furthermore, this investigation forces a conversation about the definition of civil rights in the 21st century. For a long time, the narrative of civil rights enforcement has focused on specific protected classes and systemic discrimination in housing or employment. This investigation reminds the public that the right to gather, pray, and worship without fear of physical intrusion is also a foundational civil right. The DOJ's willingness to defend this specific right will be a litmus test for its commitment to a neutral application of the law. Comparing this to historical context, we can look at the civil rights era of the 1960s. During that time, the federal government eventually stepped in to protect black churches from attacks, recognizing that local law enforcement was often unable or unwilling to provide security. While the dynamics today are different, the principle remains. When a specific group or institution is targeted for their beliefs or identity and local remedies are insufficient, federal intervention becomes the fail-safe mechanism of the Constitution. The tactical evolution of these agitators is also worth noting. Modern protests are often designed for virality. The goal is often to create a scene that generates footage for social media, regardless of the legal consequences. This performance activism complicates security protocols. Security teams must balance the need to neutralize a threat with the knowledge that any physical response will be filmed and potentially edited to frame the church as the aggressor. The federal investigation provides a necessary objective review of these chaotic moments, cutting through the edited clips to establish the facts of the encounter. In conclusion, the Department of Justice's decision to launch a civil rights investigation into the storming of the Minnesota church is a development of high strategic importance. It represents a reassertion of the federal government's role in policing the boundaries of protest and protecting the sanctity of religious observance. We have analyzed the legal foundations of the FACE Act, which provides the jurisdiction for this probe. We have explored the cultural shift that has made churches targets for political aggression. We have also outlined the potential scenarios, ranging from a restoration of order through deterrence to a continued escalation of hostility if enforcement wavers. The central takeaway is that the freedom of religion is not merely a theoretical concept. It requires physical security and legal enforcement to exist in practice. If a congregation cannot meet without fear of an organized takeover of their service, then the right to free exercise is effectively nullified. This investigation is not just about one Sunday in Minnesota. It is about establishing the rules of engagement for a polarized society. We must remain vigilant in monitoring the outcome of this case. The findings of the DOJ will reveal much about the current administration's priorities and the future of religious liberty in America. It is essential that we, as observers and citizens, support a legal system that applies the law blindly, protecting all peaceful gatherings from physical disruption, regardless of the political motivations of those who seek to disrupt them. I encourage you to delve deeper into the history of the FACE Act and to observe how this case progresses through the legal system. It serves as a barometer for the health of our civil liberties. Thank you for engaging with this analysis. Let us hope that wisdom and justice prevail, ensuring that the sanctuary remains a place of peace.